Okay.
Hey,
Hey, how's it going, man?
pretty good. So Michael and I haven't had a chance to talk in a while, and Michael wasn't able to make the Meditations of the Tarot conversation, so we thought we might get together and just like see what we each have been thinking about. Maybe talk about Michael's impressions of Meditations on the Tarot since he wasn't able to make the first conversation, and then see where it goes from there. So Michael, I'll kind of let you start. Like, tell me what you thought of chapter 1 of Meditations on the Tarot since you weren't able to be part of the initial conversation.
Yeah, man, that book is really dense in terms of like it's funny because like the whole I'd say that for me the whole first chapter is about kind of laying out what these are, he uses this term arcanum of the tarot are, which was a word that was kind of new to me, but he kind of defines it in the text as being this sort of not like a secret or a mystery, but like something. How does he put it? Like,
It says a ferment or an enzyme.
yeah, like it's so weird because like it's almost like all the language in the chapter is kind of making points to me that feel very familiar coming from Barfield, but like of just saying like what I'm pointing to isn't actually what I'm pointing to, like because the language isn't there to really point to it. But so it's almost like the language is acting out a sort of pattern that you either have some resonance with based on your experience or you don't.
Right. Who do you
And
let me
so
ask, this never came up. This never came up in our initial conversation. Let me just adjust my camera a little bit. This never came up in our initial conversation, but who do you think Tomberg's the letters are addressed to Dear Unknown Friend. So who do you think Tomberg's intended audience for the reception of these letters is? I think that matters.
yeah, that's something I would probably, I don't know, because I didn't, for all I knew from my reading of it, it was, I guess I'm curious, was he intending this to be anonymous and that he kind
Yeah,
of got outed
yeah, that's
by
right.
his, okay. How was he
He
outed?
realized that although he says things that make it obvious that he was aware that he was giving away so much detail that it would become obvious who it was.
Hmm. And
But it
was it
was written.
actually, as the intro seems to lead you to believe, that he was desirous of this being published posthumously? Was that how it went down, or was he still alive?
It came out in 1980 is when it was published. I'm not. Let me check and see when Tomberg died really quick. Let's see here. Yeah, he died in 73, so it did come out
Okay,
posthumously. Yes. Yes. So it first appeared in public. It was first appeared in 1980, so it was 7 years after his death.
interesting.
Mm.
So which tells you a lot, right? That he saw there was a certain just a magnitude of danger in these ideas, right? In
Yeah.
what they represent, and their ability to undermine and shake all your kind of all these sort of propositional ways of conceiving and knowing the world. Like it's yeah, I could see why he did that. And this is like one of those books, even when we first started talking about it, like I was like, really? Like that's gonna have something of interest. But like as soon as you start reading it, like there's I don't know what it is. I've been thinking about like trying to describe what it is I have this sense of, but it's just like I said, I was just alluding to previously, there's just a sort of resonance of sorts that isn't contained within any of the words or even what the words specifically are pointing to. It's in this kind of sort of overall pattern of an effort to try and say that the things we're talking about here are deeper than we can say, and trying to invite the reader into a sort of collaboration with this deeper reality, which I think we've
Right.
talked about this before, but I think we all have some sort of sense of, but like for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like for most of us we give a lot of heed to it. Or maybe I think we actually are, in another sense, we are having to give heed to it, or we wouldn't be accomplishing anything in the world. But maybe it's like the way it works is that we tend to have, like, because of like how the 21st century is structured, and this sort of advanced, post-industrial civilization, we become very, very particular in the things that we become kind of expert and good at, right? Like they're just so fine edged relative to any other time and place in history. And so within those spheres of where we practice something and it becomes a sort of art form or it becomes an embodied practice for us, I think we have to be doing this or we wouldn't be successful in any meaningful way. Like we wouldn't be able to create anything of value in terms of any modes of engaging with the world. But we tend to think, but we take what we learn in those little disciplines and we walk away from it, and we don't really see that it's applicable to other areas of life.
Right.
If that makes sense.
No, yeah, that's exactly right. We typically don't. So, let's say, take for example, like, a basketball player who shows like complete mastery of their sport and is able to participate like on the court, in this fully embodied participatory way. They may not see the application of that to their spiritual life. And Tom Berg's primary concern here is the application of those principles to the spiritual life. But we can see these principles in operation in many areas of life.
But also, I would say maybe just because it's so counter to my own use of that word historically in my own life and how I've thought of that word, quote unquote, spiritual. He's also broadening the definition of what is spiritual to be sort of all encompassing of.
Yes, he's actually pointing in both directions. So he's trying to help you to see how these principles come to bear within the spiritual life, but he's also trying to show you how that when these things are brought to bear in any other area of life, they are actually spiritual principles that are being put into place.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually works both ways.
Yeah.
So basically, he's pointing toward the inherent spirituality of everything, how everything comes together through this collaboration of heaven and earth.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, and I also think, in terms of the intended audience, I don't think his audience for this book is anybody's Catholic grandmother, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, Tom Berg is very much an Orthodox practicing Catholic at the point in his life where he writes this. He was an anthroposophist earlier. Before that, and he had anthroposophical writings. I can't say that. I can say anthroposophy, but when I have to put the O on the end of it, somehow it's just like a tongue failure. I can't say it ever.
Yeah, I extremely miss
anthroposophical. I can't if I'm not thinking about it. I did it fine there, but in any case, so but by the time he's writing this, he's converted to Catholicism. He's very much an Orthodox Catholic. The afterword for the book is written by Hans Urs von Balthasar, who was a cardinal at the time. So he has the afterword of the book is written by a cardinal. The book has endorsements by members of holy orders. So he's operating,
which is shocking to me. It's shocking to me, especially given when it was published. That going back that far. I mean, I could
imagine that in evangelical world in 1980.
Yeah.
There's no way. It's like, yes, Yes, this is it would immediately get labeled as satanic, and would have no reception within the evangelical world for sure. No doubt about that.
But maybe within a sort of cloistered kind of academic circles, there was a certain sense that this is impenetrable enough that it's safe, to kind of like nobody's really going to pick up this and labor through it.
Well, this actually, to me, it relates directly to who the intended audience is, right? So the intended, so I think these are related questions. So no, it's not for your Catholic grandmother, and it's not for my, it's not for my Pentecostal mother, right? Okay, so neither of those are the intended audience. And he's like, in the first chapter, he's like, he's very clear to talk about how like this Christian esotericism that he's presenting is in no way a replacement for the exoteric faith, right? Um, so I think his
And yet,
audience,
nevertheless, it's sort of its heart and soul is what he's claiming.
so I think his audience is toward people who are already, his audience is people who are already on the esoteric path. So that he can see the Christian way of following that esoteric path. That's who I
And I
think his
wonder
audience
too
is.
if maybe he isn't hoping that folks that are completely outside of the Christian fold, who are just seekers, who will pick up this book and like, oh, what's this about, and then kind
Right.
of be kind of led from this extreme periphery back into the center.
Yeah, I think that's what its intention is. So, and people who are already into esotericism tend to not be people of the center, right? I mean, it's like esotericism is kind of it's a very niche interest. It's not the standard approach. So what he's trying to show is how it's still important, how it actually, and how it can support the center. I think that's kind of what's going on when he talks about the relationship between the Church of John and the Church of Peter. And his emphasis of like the Church of Peter still being the head becomes an important message to people who have esoteric leanings, because that's something that, and I'm speaking for myself here as much as for anyone, that we can lose sight of.
Yeah,
because we see
absolutely.
how rich and just what's the word adjective I'm looking for, and exciting these esoteric insights are. Like we can tend to overstate their importance, and Tomberg is very, very clear to emphasize that, like, it has a role to play, but it's not the role of the head.
Yeah.
So he associates it more with the church of the heart, and he also says things like that. What Christian Hermeticism is like, it's the common soul of art and science and religion.
Yeah, I found that interesting, him linking those three things together and saying that's something you would not hear ever in the 21st century, that those three things have a common soul.
Right. What did you think about, like, when did you buy him when he said that, or
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you kind of take those out, you can kind of boil them down to like the transcendentals of, truth, goodness, and beauty. And it's clearly, those things have become divorced from one another, but they clearly, you can't make sense of any of them without the others. Like,
yeah, there was that great little practical line in the first chapter where he said, like, Christian Hermeticists do not have the secret of the cure to cancer,
yeah,
which is just it's a very grounded, like, down to earth thing. And I think it's very sincere appreciation of the simple exoteric faith of, the average, butt in a pew.
yeah.
It's important.
What I think it sets up an immediate contrast to modern ways of knowing and understanding.
Right.
Be-
It also that humility of acknowledging that also guards against that that Gnostic tendency, because like Gnosticism is kind of another path of esotericism, really, ultimately. But the Gnostic tendency has a tendency to the Gnostic tendency is prone to separate itself and to think that it's above that,
Mhm.
right? So you're not in the club unless you have our secret special knowledge. And that's not what he's talking about here. He's not talking about some secret special knowledge that anyone needs to have. What he's showing you is what value there is in pursuing this kind of knowledge if you're already inclined to do it. If you're essentially if you're already on that path.
Yeah, well, it is very interesting because the book is obviously very in some sense it's very highbrow in terms of
Oh yeah.
the articulation in the language, but
The sheer
but
diversity of the kinds of sources that he cites is pretty astounding too. I mean, like it's everything from like obscure 19th century um uh magical esotericist writings to economists.
Mhm.
You know, he quotes Keynes in chapter one, and Aquinas and Bonaventure, and it's just like so. It's like the sheer breadth of what he's drawing from is pretty astounding. I don't think you can find
which
many books that quote like from like the Emerald Table and John Maynard Keynes in the same chapter.
which makes one think that this almost in some sense is a life's work of sorts.
Yeah,
This must be this must have existed in some form for a large portion of his life, in terms of cobbled notes and just ideas that he felt all were kind of on this sort of theme. Um, but I it's funny you mentioned that. So he has the anthroposophical leanings that he comes out of, and then when do you know how long that was for in his life? Like at what point because he
a
actually
good, a good,
explicitly mentioned Steiner.
yeah, a good chunk. I'm not sure exactly in terms of number of years, but it was a significant length of time that he was in those
Hmm.
circles. And yeah, I mean, that's for those of our listeners who don't know. I mean, we do talk about because we're both heavily influenced by Barfield. This channel often is dealing with um, anthroposophical sources quite often because of Barfield, because Barfield is closely associated with those sources as via Steiner. So that's what we're really talking about. Is we're talking about like that sort of Steiner influenced. We did a whole series on Emil Bach's Apocalypse of John, and Bach is another anthroposophical thinker. So this is not new territory for us. Um, and Tomberg was associated with that for a long time. So just to get back to the Barfield connection, here's the interesting thing. This is a little random, but I just wanted to see I just want to bounce this off of you. Um, so Barfield was a sort of anthroposophical friendly. I don't know if you want to. I mean, I think he just is an anthroposophist. Honestly, if I'm being perfectly honest, ultimately at the end of the day,
Hmm.
um, he's a confessing Anglican at the same time. And then you have, I mean, you have amongst Inklings, you have another Inkling who is also a Christian Hermeticist along the lines of Tomberg, and Charles Williams. And I was talking to my son the other day, and I think that C.S. Lewis in That Hideous Strength, just as his his model for Ransom is Tolkien, I think his model for Merlin is Charles Williams. I think that's who he's thinking of.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I mean, obviously Merlin is on the side of good in that book, But there is that little bit where um he's he's warned about like how what he does was perhaps lawful in his day, but on the borders of the law, but not lawful anymore, which seems to be kind of like Lewis kind of like putting his own position on what he thought of Williams's Hermeticist leanings, perhaps. I don't know, just a thought I
Interesting.
had. I don't have anything to base that on other than just my intuition. And it
Well,
seems to make
it's
sense, especially since he puts it in it's in Ransom's voice that the questioning of the lawfulness is, and Tolkien is the one who's supposed to have referred to Charles Williams as like, I don't remember what he said, basically called him like that weird wizard or something like that, to that something, some words to that effect. So
yeah. Well, it's interesting, with too, in terms of Lewis's thoughts about Barfield, even though he has such high praise for him throughout his letters and even like some of the dedications of his books.
yeah.
I think at one point he said, in regards to the Inkling, he said, Barfield towers above us all. And I think he really meant that, but at the same time, he seemed like he really didn't like the Steiner influence as well. And I don't think that was ever resolved in terms of their friendship. And it's funny because I have this book of essays over here it's called Barfield on Lewis, and it's just essays that Owen Barfield, where he references C.S. Lewis, and that was one thing he said that was very characteristic of C.S. Lewis, in that he typically, if he had a criticism of a particular writer or thinker, he would like read everything that person had ever written and then take him to task. And he makes the point he could never get Lewis to take Steiner that seriously, to do that, like to even like seriously read anything he'd written. And that I think that particular essay was written after Lewis was dead, so it was like that persisted throughout their relationship.
Why do you think that is?
It's a great question. I think it comes. It's funny. This other book which was my first introduction to Barfield, which was, I think I've said before, like it's just the poorest of introductions because it's so complicated and riven with like sort of inside baseball of both early 20th century philosophy that I didn't have background in, but also like the particularities of Lewis and Barfield's relationship. But one of the things I got out of that book was this big difference where C.S. Lewis always thought there was this big delineation to be made between what can be contemplated and what can be enjoyed.
Mm.
And I think that was I still think that is like a fundamental error in Lewis's thought, where because he has this idea of, what's it called? What's his word? Sehnsucht. It's like a German word for a sort of longing that is both sorrowful and joyful simultaneously.
Right. Yeah, he
It's
talks
sort of,
about that a lot in Surprised by Joy.
yeah, but yeah, it's a very big thing for him because, yeah, like you said, the Surprised by Joy is his autobiography, and he really, you can tell it's something that he wants to give some articulation from, but he just feels like he can't do it. But he kind of has this sort of placeholder for it. But he always somehow sees that distinct from any ability to contemplate and to understand things and to comprehend. Like he sees those things as fundamentally different tasks.
Mm.
And rather than like what I was just referring to earlier, where I'm saying like, no, actually, somehow C.S. Lewis didn't realize that in all his excelling, he was in some sense still listening to that same thing. It was on that same thread. He was just, I think he was right. So like I think about
Do
this
you
way,
think
because
Lewis ever had any sense of contemplation as divine descent? Is
I
that
think
what
he
he was
did, but
missing?
I don't think he had many experiences of it. I think he had such a strong intellect and a strong desire to put things on solid, unshakable ground, that I don't think he could I think there were many ideas that he just couldn't
Yeah, I
touch.
think he was as a much in. I think that Lewis was internally at war between the rational and imaginative part of himself as Barfield was, but
Right.
that Lewis never really made the same kind of effort to reconcile those. And I'm
I
not
think
I
he
don't and I
kind of
don't even
does.
and I don't mean that as a criticism. You think he does?
Mhm.
Okay, go ahead. Let me hear how
I
you
would
think he
I would
does.
say like surprised by joy, which I'm not surprised by
Yeah,
joy. Until we have faces, um,
yeah. Right.
is the best synthesis. But he didn't write that by himself, so maybe it's not a complete representation of his own thinking at that point. But I think joy helped him write a good bit of it. So I don't know, but like I do think because that you kind of pointed to something else. So that was another big feature of the quote unquote Great War between Barfield and Lewis, was whether the imagination is a truth bearing faculty,
Right.
which Barfield clearly was in the camp that it was, and Lewis was not. Um, although I think Barfield, even at that early stage where while this is going on, Lewis is still an atheist, and he was able to put significant enough cracks in his thinking that I think those continued to widen the rest of his life. Although he still, in terms of his public writings, he's very kind of prosaic in terms of what he thinks is quote unquote true. But it is interesting that most of his I think his enduring legacy in the wider world is still his fictional works,
Yeah.
which he's certainly doing something different there, even though at times they can be sort of didactic, right, in terms of like
Mm-hmm.
trying to make a point, a little too on the nose
There's
with
a lot more going on than people give him credit for. I think,
yeah.
and Tolkien's criticisms were. I mean, I'm one of those people, and this is probably going to get us some angry comments, but I think I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it. I'll say it again. I think Lewis was a better writer than Tolkien,
Hmm.
and I think that there was no small degree of rivalry going on
Yeah,
in
sure.
that situation in Tolkien's assessment of Lewis. I think Lewis was a much more gifted writer, which is not, and I specifically mean as a writer, like as a
Of
crafter of
prose, yeah.
prose. That isn't to say that what Tolkien accomplished isn't still extraordinary. Um, his ability to create a secondary world that captures the imagination is unparalleled, and that still matters. And I don't mean to denigrate Tolkien's work. I'm just saying, if I were to objectively judge, like who writes the more compelling prose of the two, my answer is Lewis.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, definitely better, definitely the better communicator, the greater capacity and capability to distill very complex ideas into modes of thought that are much greater, like much greater reach of like a mass population of people to understand and to continue the furtherance of certain ideas. um Speaking of Tolkien, though, one thing too, I think Tolkien, his achievements were enormous, and obviously, he probably, by if you just measured book sales, he's probably blown C.S. Lewis out of the water.
oh, for
Although
sure.
they're both probably have they're both writers that are still books are bought from every day.
There's more that
Um,
goes to making a writer great in the final analysis as to who writes the most lovely prose.
yeah,
So
but
so what and it is that imagination, I think, that we were just, I mean, it is the genius of the imagination, I think, is probably the greatest factor in terms of whether a writer is truly enduring or not.
yeah, absolutely. And I think I think Tolkien's ability to create this world with just tremendous depth. I think a lot of that, I'm biased in saying this, so there might be people that would disagree, but I think a lot of it he owes a lot to Barfield in terms of Barfield's insistence that the very root of language has a mythological structure, so that Tolkien was very interested in languages. It period saw he saw like these sort of artificial languages he created were absolutely kind of fundamental to the structure of the world he was creating. And I think he might have pursued that otherwise, but I don't, maybe wouldn't have taken it as far as he did and been as successful without that kind
He
of.
didn't even intend to publish what he was working on,
Yeah.
actually. So that was at the encouragement, I know, of Lewis, and I think probably of not just Lewis, but I think his friends are the reason that we have these
Definitely.
books. So
Definitely.
so the kind of like, so the Inklings all have a hand in the fact that we have these wonderful gifts from Tolkien, because
Absolutely.
his inclination was not necessarily to publish them. So thanks for that. And I think Barfield, I mean, you can see Barfield's influence is pretty much, it's there in the writings of every single Inkling. Like, his ideas are, once you understand what he's talking about, it's pretty hard not to be captivated by them to a certain degree, because he's onto something pretty enormous.
Yeah. It's foundational, but in certain sense it's so deep that it doesn't really, it's present, like you said, in all the Inklings, but it doesn't really poke its head out in ways that you can really point at. But because also a lot of the work that Barfield did was very early on. He was like the first of any of them to be published.
Right.
He actually had some, he had like W.H. Auden writes the prelude or the foreword to his his first published book, History in English Words. So he actually had a little bit of, I don't know, early critical success, and even poetic diction was very well received. But then after that, he goes into the law, and it takes this long hiatus from anything until he retires.
Right.
And goes back into exploring these ideas again. So he's kind of just swept away from the scene, right when Tolkien and Lewis and others started becoming popularly known writers in the wider world.
Right. Yeah. So any let's see if we can tie this back to what we were talking about with Tomberg or not, or if you just have any more thoughts on that. There was something, let me see if I can find it. There was something, go ahead and give me your thoughts about that while I look for something else. Like, there was something that I read this morning that I thought of when you were talking about imagination. And I just got to it. I didn't even know what to make of it yet. So I started reading Alexander Dugin's Fourth Political Theory.
Mm-hmm.
And
what's your impression on him so far?
I will reserve judgment until I finish actually
Yeah.
reading Fourth Political Theory. I think he's a grab bag of things that I absolutely affirm, and some things that I find terrifying. I would say so far, but I want to before I say anything too much, I want to wait until I finish. So yeah, I think let's see here. Imagining, okay, this is it. This is just this sentence. Just this sentence. I think this connect. I think this connects potentially to our discussion about Tomberg, our conversation about Inklings and Barfield, and his idea that the imagination is a truth-bearing faculty as well. But just this peculiar sentence, which I'm hoping you can help me figure it out, because I'm not sure I figured it out yet. But I just found it fascinating. It stuck in my mind, and I remember vaguely where in the book it was. Imagination as a structure precedes the individual, the collective, class, culture, and race, if race exists as a sociological phenomenon, which is uncertain, as well as the state.
Yeah, I think part of what I mean, my immediate reaction is a sort of, I immediately think of imagination being a sort of prerequisite for categories, period. Like we think of categories as something that are just kind of there. We don't realize that there's something fundamentally human about their creation and maintenance and the reality even of them, um, which I think points to um, some of the elements of this relationship between divinity and um, mankind.
Right. And just let's bring in Jordan Peterson for a minute here, because is that not ultimately that faculty of imagination? Isn't that ultimately where we actually derive meaning? Because I think I think it's that imaginative faculty, which just going to suggest, I'm throwing this out there. I'm going to suggest for a minute that the imaginative faculty is connected to participation in some way, I think.
Mhm.
And I think that it is that the imaginative faculty by which we are actually able to understand essences, even though we can't articulate them. So perhaps when Aquinas says that we can't even know the essence of a fly, he's not right. We can't articulate the essence of even a fly. We can't lexically define the essence of even a fly, but through our imaginative capacity, we know what a fly is in its essence nonetheless.
Right.
That is not, don't tie me to that. That sentence captured my imagination, and I'm trying to work out what its implications might be.
Sorry.
That's all right, no problem. Life happens.
Well, let's do the even harder work,
Oh,
because we're talking
okay.
about this imaginative faculty.
Like, this isn't brain busting enough already. Oh, let's make it harder. Yeah. No, go for it.
But I think it's important, like, to kind of be more specific about, like, what do we mean when we say the imaginative faculty?
Right.
Because that I think, again, coming from Barfield, I always think, well, these words have shifted quite a bit, and that comes with all sorts of confusions, that because I do think most people, when they say when they think of the imaginative, they think of the kind of capacity, capability to create, to take something that doesn't exist. And oftentimes, the more novel it is, the more kind of distinct and outlandish it is relative to um, the rest of what we've kind of seen. So it's almost like, sort of like, when we think of what is most imaginative, we think of what's some measure of, like, say, novelty, is maybe what I think a 21st century person maybe kind of conjures in their head when they hear that.
Right.
And I do think there is a creative component to it. But it is,
It's not wrong though either. Behold, I make all things new.
right. Right.
So
I think so. For myself, and I get kind of really kind of weird about things, because, like, I sort of find these little heuristics that sort of work for me, and I don't know if they're just kind of specific to myself, or if they actually have any usefulness for a wider audience. But for me, like, I think of, like, the imagination as a sort of gathering together, and we all have a phenomenological experience of how that's happening, like, just within our senses at any given time, right? It's sort of like this fundamental building block of consciousness. It's something we're doing all the time, rather than sort of like in moments where we try and be quote unquote creative. Now, but I do think what happens in the moments when we are trying to quote unquote be creative, we're extending that same thing. So there's a sort of scene that is it's a gathering together of what we've already experienced and sort of projecting it into this space of possibility. In a certain sense,
it's a big deal. I wonder even if it's not the line between what constitutes an actual consciousness versus a mere intelligence. Like, I think if you have I think if you have no imaginative capacity, I think what you have can be described as an intelligence, perhaps, but not fully conscious.
yeah. And here's the other question too. This is something I think about a lot as well. In what ways our limitations play into this? Our capacity for this activity.
Well, there's always in terms of the exercise of the imaginative faculty, limitation always comes into play, right? So it begins with it has this curious property of being, even though it's contained within it's a capacity that exists within finite creatures. It has an infinity to it. It has an infinity to it so long, however, as it's merely considering potentialities.
Yeah.
The minute something actively begins to be created, inspired by that imaginative faculty, limitation comes into play. Otherwise, we've never, and if those limitations weren't brought into play, then nothing would ever be able to be created at all from that field of infinite possibility.
Well, and to bring this back to Tomberg, he mentions, I think somewhere in here, about this idea of, I don't know if does he use imagination, but he talks about bringing the maximal amount of attention to the smallest point of space.
Yes. Right.
And
I think that's about I think that's where the actuating process is beginning, because he's talking about the magician, right? Who is he's engaging in an act that we can think of as a creative act, which has a participatory element to it, which has an imaginative capacity to it, which has a focus capacity to it. So I do think, yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry if I threw it off track. I just wanted help trying to make sense of that sentence, because it basically suggests as imagination as a prior to all conceptual categories.
I think, which I think is actually right. I mean, the other thing I thought about immediately was obviously Adam and his naming of the animals, and that's such a bizarre thing from our perspective today. But I think something really profound is going on there, or is being kind of alluded to, at least.
Well, and also in biblical thought, names are connected to essences, which is why I'm making that link to the imaginative capacity being that capacity which is able to perceive essences. So, which is that to put it in McGilchrist language, that's kind of what McGilchrist is talking about in this right brain capacity to see wholes. That's where we're able to see the wholeness of a thing that is beyond the mere parts that constitute it, which I think is to see its essence.
Yeah. It's funny you're talking about names. I was reading recently the foreword from this is W.H. Auden from the foreword of Barfield's book. He talks about a poet, one might say, this is a quote from Auden, one might say is
which book, by the way?
Sorry, History in English Words.
Okay.
This is the foreword, written by W.H. Auden. But in it, he says, he's trying to describe what the book's about that Barfield's going on about. But he says, a poet, one might say, is someone who tries to give an experience its proper name. And it is characteristic of proper names that they cannot be translated, only transliterated. And then he says, furthermore, precisely because writing poetry is a gratuitous act, in it, as Valerie observed, quote, everything which must be said is almost impossible to say well.
Right. Well, this is what Plato is doing in the dialogues too, right? Plato's not meaning to suggest that things like the good or justice or these kinds of concepts, when he makes people look silly trying to pen down what it is philosophically and lexically, he's not asserting that these things don't exist. He's actually showing us something, right? That's part of what this wisdom of learned ignorance is that we can't know these things through our apprehensive left brain logical faculties, but we still know them. You still know what goodness is. You still know what justice is. You're just never going to be able to articulate it.
Yeah.
Because for one thing, they're ultimately not finite concepts.
Yeah. And in a certain sense, because of the fact that the world has in many of its categories and thinking has become very Christian, right? Even through quote unquote secularity, it has this fundamental Christian substructure to what makes up what we think of as modern secularity. There's a lot of power to be gained by being able to define those words in ways that are advantageous to whatever project you're about, because they're tacitly accepted by everybody. So if you can control how those are defined in some degree, you can you basically have a sort of mind virus that gets into everybody, that because it's already there.
And that's the will to power, I would say, right? Like wanting to have the ability to define and fix so that you can control. I think that is like that the desire to absolutely fix those things, to me, is intimately connected to the will to power.
Yeah. Yeah, I really, this.
But that doesn't.
Chapter...
But notice that this is still contrary, and we're kind of like we're riffing on Barfield here ultimately. So this is why Barfield is sometimes called the other postmodernist, right? So you can see that there's a sort of like vaguely postmodern flavor to it, but at the same time, using those Barfieldian tools, you can still claim that the truth still is very much a real thing. Goodness is still very much a real thing. Justice is still very much a real thing. And your inability to lexically fix and control and have like an objective notion of those things doesn't mean that they're not real. It just means that you're using the wrong capacity in order to discern them.
And it's interesting too, like another big major theme of this first chapter, which seems by his own account, is foundational for everything else that's going on in the book. Is this idea of like this sort of childlikeness that he links to in quoting Jesus' response that whoever comes in the kingdom of God must become like this child. And also, which is also very linked to this idea of concentration without effort, which is very. When there's parts of me that read that and my brain just explodes. Like I'm like, well, what does that even mean? But at the same token, I sort of know what he's talking about.
It's a relational knowing, I would say, or A knowing by loving. Like ultimately that's what that comes down to.
You know what this also makes me think about, and yeah, I know this has kind of been a sort of thread in previous discussions we've had about like this idea of the divine double, and this sort of, I don't know, this sort of sense of simultaneously feeling like one is reflecting on like sort of the deep, like you feel there's a sense in which you're like you're kind of at the deepest core of yourself and going in and further in, and at the same time it feels like that what the sort of knowledge or even revelation that you feel like you're receiving is completely other. Like it's like you feel like you're understanding and seeing things that you couldn't possibly have known any other way than have it come from somehow what outside of yourself.
Right.
And that to me, I don't know, seems to me like maybe a sort of phenomenological experience of this idea of the divine double, of this sort of linkage to something higher that is you and yet not you at the same time. It's like a, and I don't.
Well, I think it's related to the connection between the nothing and the all, and the zero and the infinite.
Spell that out for me, because those are
I don't know
categories
if I
that.
can.
Well,
I just
me, I'm just wondering what makes you connect the two, because like I wouldn't have made that connection at all. I'm just like,
no,
I'm
no
trying to
problem.
figure.
Okay. I think those are they're hinting at the same paradox, and also like the connection between descent and ascent. So when you descend to the when you descend to the lowest depths, ultimately you pass through to the highest heights.
Oh.
I know I'm being really
No.
I don't. Well, we're talking about something that I think is genuinely beyond articulation. So I'm just trying to use some images to try and to hint at what I think you're
No,
talking
the reason I
about.
sighed there wasn't frustration that you weren't articulating well. It's like I was it was just a sense of recognition that what you're saying was true, but it's also like, man, it's like, yeah, that's because in some sense when I'm reading this, for me, like a lot of this stuff isn't just it's not just intellectual for me. It's like it's existential for me, trying to figure out how to have a sort of compass for my own life and how to make decisions of the highest order in terms of like how I prioritize my thoughts and feelings, affections, and just how I spend my time. And so I'm looking for in these texts for clues to do that better.
Right.
And so what I heard you saying there was like, yeah, like
Well, we can see we can kind of like we can see this by looking at let's look at Christ. Let's look at Christ, and maybe that will like point us toward like a better understanding of this. So Christ does this. He conquers death by death, and he accomplishes the ultimate work of making God all in all by this conquering of death by death and this descent into hell. And this and that's kind of what this is I think that's what this is pointing at.
yeah.
Did
No,
I make
I
it
think it's
worse?
right.
Or
Well,
does that help? Or
no. Like, well,
or does that make it worse?
well, I mean, there's, I think what you're saying, like, I feel like I've had sort of intimations of the truth of what you were saying about like, it is really through dying that we experience eternal life. And like, and it's not in some sort of like, just we die, like in some really deep way. And yet
Right.
there's another part of me that really, really would is sort of like, trying to find any other way besides that.
Right. No, yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly the direction I was trying to hint at. So I mean, that's the, yeah. Um,
which
yeah,
is why I sighed, because like I'm like, yeah,
right.
that's true, but like I think a lot of times, I'm there's some aspect of my thinking that's always looking for a shortcut of some kind.
Well, that's that. Yeah, all of us. That
You
you,
know.
you and everybody else, right?
Hmm.
Right. So, and it's like, and there, I mean, and let's just, I mean, I'll be clear here. We don't mean, when we're talking about this concept, we don't mean just like death, like only in the sense of like your inevitable, like biological death of your, of your embodied existence.
Yeah.
There are many deaths that might be required of you along the way.
Yeah. Well, I think for speaking for myself personally, like a lot of that, what I realize needs to die is just habits, you know,
Mhm.
modes of being that to me feel so close to my identity that, kind of altering them or giving them up would, you know, be like a death,
Right. And this is
and
connected to this thing that you were talking about, like, which was kind of like essentially what you were talking about is like, where do these thoughts even come from?
mhm.
Right. Like, what is their source? Like, which of these things that I'm thinking are me? Are any of them me?
Yeah,
So
that's a real brain bender, because
it came up in our estuary. My brother-in-law brought it up at our estuary meeting on Tuesday. It's like, oh boy, well, this is what we're going to be talking about the rest of the time. That
well,
didn't end up that didn't end up being the case, but it is a, we really don't know where our thoughts come from.
yeah, or even where agency resides. Like,
Exactly.
does my agency reside up here? Does it reside, more in the center of the body in some way? Like there's all these vital organs there that are doing all
Right.
kinds of things
Right.
that we, are very central to the very foundational elements of
Yeah.
what we're doing.
The phenomenological experience of every single human being flatly contradicts the materialist idea that all of your thoughts are just here in this gray matter
Yeah.
between your ears. No, that's not. That's no one's experience.
Yeah. Well, even if you want to put like quote unquote neurons on some sort of hierarchy of like, they're like the end all be all of information processing, you still have lots of neurons outside of your head, you know. I,
Right.
you know,
Right. Right.
and I think, we've yeah, we've just in this framework of, thinking, we just have very oversimplified thoughts. Like, to me, like, it's just funny, like when, like, say Sam Harris is like, oh yeah, this fMRI thing on the brain shows that, wait, we don't have free will because, we could see that you were going to choose the right hand over the left hand, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 tenths of a second before you actually had a conscious awareness, supposedly, of, when you thought you had that conscious
Right.
awareness.
But that presupposes this kind of idea that that kind of conscious awareness is the only kind of knowing, which brings us right
Mhm.
directly back to this to Tomberg and in chapter 1 on the magician when he's talking about concentration without effort. Because when you're when you're engaging in activity where you have achieved this mastery of concentration without effort, there's no conscious awareness. Like, I think the
Yeah.
example he uses is like the tightrope walker. If the minute that tightrope walker thinks about where he's placing his foot, he's going to fall and die.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't.
Exactly.
But that is in no way a demonstration of determinism. It's just a demonstration that neurologists have a bad way of thinking about knowledge. Their epistemology is broken at a more fundamental level than that.
Definitely. Because in some sense, it makes me think, in some sense, like, the age, whatever agency we have, it's sort of widely distributed in our bodies. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, certain central organs, the head, the heart, other things, are supposed to have some sort of overarching framework for unifying all those different agencies into one in a meaningful way. But we really don't understand that, and we really don't have categories for it. So that
Right. And we're starting to kind of understand that some of these things are true too, right? So, we've all like, I mean, we say things like, oh, I just felt it in my gut.
yeah,
Well, it turns out that your gut actually might be an actual center of agency after all.
it definitely is.
So,
Or if it wasn't, none of us would survive. Like
right,
we wouldn't.
right,
You know.
right, right. So, yeah. So what how do you want to connect this to this figure of the magician, like the first arcana? And then I would also want to direct you, but like at the beginning we started to deal with the issue of like how Talmberg is defining an arcanum and what an arcanum is, and I think you had more to say there. So if I wanted to give you the opportunity to return back to that if you wanted to.
Yeah, I don't know if I
Because I
can
think I
say it.
sidetracked you with something else before you got a chance to say everything you wanted to.
Well, like you brought up the idea that he calls it a ferment.
Yeah, fermenter and enzyme. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not the thing itself. It is.
Is it helpful to? I mean, let me maybe this might help you on that, and if not, maybe it'll just confuse things. But I think this it comes up. There's a connection between like this sort of hermeticism and alchemy, right? So if I think if you think of it in terms of like alchemy as a ferment or an enzyme, then I think that will put you on to. I think that really is useful. And alchemy, you can map if you map it onto chemistry from alchemy, and you think about it from a chemical standpoint, then maybe that will help you grasp what he's meaning.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, I think the best thing I can quickly link it to, it's just it's true. It's a true, philosophical mode of being, which is, like, as you've pointed out earlier, like it's a learned ignorance. So it's so much of what he's doing in this particular chapter, and what he's kind of sort of, I think, saying that Arcanum is itself is sort of wiping away of so much of the sort of crud and things that we think we know about the way the world works, the way excellence is achieved, etc., and sort of creating a space for where that imagination can project something truer,
Note that he
more
connects it to,
immediate.
note that he connects it to play.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's a concentration without effort that turns work into play. And there's the way in which play differs from work is that there's how do I want to say this? Well, I mean,
would
let me
say
just
that
open the question.
okay.
Actually, let me do that. Let me try to let's just open the question. How do you think play differs from work, and how might that connect to what he's trying to say?
I think the key difference is play is an end in itself. It's it has in mind other objectives, but those objectives are transitory. They're there for the purposes of something higher. And so, like,
But they don't exist in the moment in which you are when you are in the frame of what the magician represents, right? So for example, basketball player who's like in the zone, right, and is just like unconsciously dropping 10 3-point shots in a row, whatever, he may have an objective of winning the basketball game, but there's no notion of winning the basketball game when he's making that shot. If he were, oh my gosh, I have to make these shots to win the game, he would immediately make it miss the shot.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, because and this all links back to being the child, right? And to trying to maintain the childlike approach, even while we're trying to simultaneously approach something that could be rightfully called mastery, right? Like
Yes,
an actual
I think mastery
deep,
is the right word for it. Yeah, I think I used that way of describing it when we had our group discussion.
but so which those two things are obviously thought of as kind of separate. But one of the things I think about when I think about the child image is there's a certain, it's funny because the child's frame, there's so many things you just sort of have to necessarily just take as presuppositions without questioning them, right? And some of those are things like just like your own safety and the goodness of the world. um because you certainly you can't play, you can't do the philosophical mode of being where you say what is a thing instead of just kind of like what is, like trying to use it in some more immediate fashion, unless you have some sort of preconceived faith in the kind of the fundamental goodness of things, such that your interaction in the, because again, like, because like part of what again distinguishes play from work is when you're working, you're always getting to this sort of place, and then you're stopping because you're like, that's good enough, that will suffice, that will get me to my paycheck without
Right.
getting fired. But there's something in play there's always another layer that you're kind of
Right.
curious
Well, yeah, it's
that
like
you could go to.
yeah, right. Like when I can remember like, having to have my grandmother like, drag me out of a downpour when I was, playing street football with my friends. Like it's like there's no there's no concept of the passage of time
Mhm.
or no thought to like the fact that I'm, drenched and asthmatic and probably endangering my health or none of that. So
Yeah.
um so yeah. Yeah, I think just on the mastery thing, I want to make sure that I just want to make it here. When I say mastery, I mean like in the way that the master is connected to the sage. And both the master and the sage have a childlikeness without a childishness. Because the true master um is sort of like the master is, it's like a more general, like the sage is associated specifically with wisdom, right? Whereas the
Yeah.
master, you could be a master of anything, but that's that ability to perform concentration without effort is what kind of separates the master from the journeyman. And the
Yeah.
journeyman is still in the process of like where they they haven't achieved mastery yet, so they still have to approach it as work. So there's like, I mean, there's a lot of work that is involved in front loading before you can attain that state of mastery, where you can actually have that concentration without effort that turns work into play.
Yeah. It's true. And so like, I just speaking from my own experience, like these last, I don't know, 3 months or so for my job have just like kicked my butt.
Yeah,
um
I hear you.
but a lot of that too is just the sense that I take to it of, I have to do this. I have to do this, or I'm not gonna succeed, I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna, this whole, this whole cascade of fears and emotion that make make a lot of the activities, drudgery.
But
But
you're
then
a
I've
very,
also,
but you're a highly competent person. So I know that you've been in a job before where you've reached that state of mastery where it's like, you no longer feel those pressures, right? And it's like, it becomes as natural as like doing your work becomes as natural as breathing.
yeah, I mean, I have moments of them. I would say like one of the perverse things about information technologies is just how much it's changing all the time. So
It's
there's
true.
this sort of foundational level shift that's always like making it very difficult to like ever feel like you're you've gotten ahead of the curve, um
Right. So it's not like a trade or some other, some other kinds of occupations. I think public disclosure, which is my field, is it's kind of like that too. It's like it's always a changing landscape. I would still say that I feel like I have a high level of mastery of my job though. I can pretty much,
yeah.
there's a certain effortlessness to my work for me at this point.
Yeah, I would love to get there. So I mean, part of the problem, the challenge I'm in right now is I've come to a new company. It's a very large company, and they have a very peculiar way of doing things um,
Mm,
that they're kind of very proud of. And so um, it's like, if you came to them and said, well, like my other place, we did it this way, like they would take it as a badge of honor. Well,
yeah.
we do it this way.
That's a very common attitude with like certain kinds of tech companies.
Mhm. And
You
and
know,
and there's
it's
there's
an
there's
industry that values outside the box kind of thinking more than most.
yeah, I mean, there's some certain values in terms of what they've achieved, and I think their culture is certain critical building block to some of that, but um, it's but as an outsider, I have not only the sort of mountain of technical stuff to get up to speed with, but it's also like this whole rewriting of a sort of like cultural map of how different parts of an organization interact with one another, and like understanding that just even the basic political arrangements of what what motivates people, how you can navigate those waters to achieve larger goals with folks outside my own group and all those things. Like that's something that feels so far away from me having some clear understanding of. Like I'm getting little bits and pieces, um but but anyway, but even in the midst of all that kind of like uncertainty and feeling like I'm just like, I have had moments where I'm like, I do have those moments where the hours fly by, and I'm finding something where it is something I really
Mhm.
have this sense of play where I'm doing what I'm doing, not because I want to impress anybody, but I just want to know. Like I'm like I
Right.
just
And
like
that's where
I'm
that love,
curious.
that's that love element comes into play, right? That's like, that's when, and that's what leads to our deepest sense of knowing anything.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of, I couldn't help but thinking while you're talking, I was like, I wonder how much our modern tendency to like change jobs very frequently compared to past eras. I wonder how much of that actually like holds us back in terms of like actually not giving people time to reach that kind of true level of mastery in what they do.
Oh, definitely. And I think it can leave you stuck in this forever feeling of the old saying, fake it till you make it, where you
Hmm.
stop believing that there is anything but that,
Right. Right.
and you start seeing everybody as sort of
Right.
playing a sort of game of charades.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. I see that in my work all the time. And it's like, I mean, it seems to me like a certain degree, like at least in my line of work, which is state government, it's like, it seems like a lot of people are just kind of like faking it.
Hmm.
Like, like no one really knows. Like there are, I mean, so everyone's just making it up because no one really knows because it's like, people change, like, I mean, people tend to stay in state employment once they're there for their whole career, but they move around from position to position within state employment. So it's like,
Mhm.
it's very unusual to find someone who's been like in the same position. I mean, they exist, don't get me wrong, for 20 years and 30 years, and has never like moved into another position and is like just has absolute mastery of their area of concern. That's pretty unusual.
Yeah. And if you're ambitious, you're certainly jumping.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting because, all the like think of, coming from Barfield, there's points where in reading him, you feel compelled to have a very sort of dim view of the future.
Hmm.
Um, even even while he also makes these sort of crazy predictions as well. Um, but one thing I was thinking the other day, I don't know, are you getting close to when you
I,
need
I,
to?
I'm close. But
Okay.
it's we got time.
Okay. I had this thought the other day about, if we think back, like sort of in Barfield's way of thought, like this evolution of consciousness, where we're descending from this original participation, and within that original participation, there's such a complexity and a kind of a wealth of experience
Hmm.
of the whole kind of range of um, even like the spiritual hierarchies reality,
Yeah,
right?
the cosmos is full of life.
Yeah, and there's and it seems like even this just occurred to me the other day. I mean, Barfield kind of alludes to this a little bit in Saving the Appearances, but just even the conception of this contact with the Most High God starts this sort of process of flattening that hierarchies. Um, and it seems like the Christian perspective takes that even a step further, obviously, with um, the incarnation and the imminence of God, where like suddenly like there's this sort of flattening that takes place, and one of the side effects of that, right, that we can all see, um, is this destruction, like of paganism, right, where paganism was always this sort of recognition of sort of local, regional, like a sort of the almost the exact opposite of the Most High God, right? This sort of,
Yeah, we can see that progression of that flattening even from the Middle Ages, which was a Christian era, to our time, where within the Christianity of the Middle Ages, you still had a cosmos that was still much more full of life than our much more flattened cosmos today, because you really had like a very serious tradition of angelology and demonology, which really in the modern era, those have been significantly downplayed
Mhm.
within Christianity. And those were a kind of an important link to the ancient cosmos. Those layers, those additional layers of the hierarchy, both the you know the good hierarchy and the hierarchies of evil as well. And I think that there's Rupert Sheldrake in his book on the physics of angels, and I can't remember the name of his dialogue partner and the co-author of the book, but one of the observations that they have in that book is how there's something, by going back into angelology, there's something deeply ecumenical about that, because prior to the modern age, this idea of something like that, of some sort of like good and evil spirits, is completely universal
Mhm.
to human experience. So it kind of helps to um open a gateway to see like a common like spiritual ground.
Yeah. And so, well, part of what my thinking is, if it seems to me like there's just reading the tea leaves, there's a lot of signs that we're kind of at a sort of zenith or at this kind of ultimate depth away from final participation. It's unclear to me how we can go much further
I
without.
think we already to me, and my perception of this is that we actually already passed through the bottom,
Okay.
and we're actually
Where would you place the bottom?
I actually think the bottom was earlier in modernity.
Mhm.
I would place the bottom at the First World War. I would say that was the actual like absolute bottom of modernity, and we've been trending, like especially since the 60s. The 60s would be. I think I think there were already I think there were already signs. But let's say at the for sure, like I'd say the two world wars. Let's say like the era of the world wars was kind of the bottom. Let's say probably the end of World War II is a better choice.
Yeah.
And that since World War II, we actually are seeing like participation starting to gradually creep back in. I think that definitely is part of what's going on in the 60s. And it's not always it's not always it causes some problems in the short run, but ultimately we want these things. I think the 60s were a good thing. I think the fact that we
Yeah.
have I think that we have the fact that we have this um you know broadly spiritual new age kind of element to our culture is ultimately a good thing. And that it's here for a reason. And Christianity needs to start feeding these people because they're going into those things because they're looking for something that they're not finding in Christianity because of our
Yeah.
flattened ontology and our flattened cosmology.
Well, I think it's, well, the reason I would say that we're either at or approaching it rather than it being in the past, because I do think postmodern thought, even though it has the seeds within it of reestablishing some sort of, return to participation, in practice has done the exact opposite
Oh, I'd
for a
say
while.
postmodernity is like the bottom of the intellectual
Hmm.
project of modernity. It's basically modernity destroying and exhausting itself, I would say. But I would say in terms of like, I think that like in many ways, I think the actual culture is still kind of ahead of where the intellectual world is. Honestly, I think, and that's I think that's probably,
That's an interesting
and I've
thought. Yeah.
probably made the opposite claim in the past, but now,
I haven't considered that. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that.
but I still think yeah, I don't think
I
that
think I think you're
I
right.
don't think the intellectual world has as much power to dictate the direction of the culture as it kind of assumes that it does.
Well, I think
I
it
don't.
has had for a very long time. It has
Maybe
had a
maybe
very,
maybe that's falling apart now.
exactly. And
And I think the 60s was.
technology is playing a
I
role in
think
that.
I'm right in pointing at the 60s as the beginning of the end of that.
Hmm. That's interesting. But I do think so. Anyway, if we're gonna go back, if we're gonna follow some path back up, I do think it's going to involve recognition of like many of these spiritual forces, and with that is going to come a lot of things that are all kinds of weird,
But
like
it's already
some good, some
happening.
bad.
It's already
Yeah.
happening, even
Yeah.
in largely material circles.
Hmm.
That's what I'm saying. It's like to me, it looks like, oh, we're already. And I would say the beginnings of that were in the 60s. That's when
Yeah.
it started. And I think I think we had a, well, I think these things are kind of cyclical to a certain degree, right? I think that as the boomers like aged, right, and became cynical yuppies, like in the 80s, I think there was maybe a move back into the depths of materialism and withdrawal for a while there.
Hmm.
But but the things that were reintroduced into the culture in the 60s never went away entirely.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that it's just now kind of exploding back onto the scene again.
But I do think like another way to think about this too. I do think there's some fundamental layer of culture of West, quote unquote, Western culture that's dying.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know.
I think modernity and liberalism are dying,
Yeah, but
and it's going to
but
and
those things have become
some sort of some sort of alliance between postmodernism and traditionalism is coming to build whatever is the culture of the near future.
yeah. I guess I don't know. It feels like I know there's people that see life-giving elements of postmodernism, but I have a tough time seeing it because why see it the way it plays itself out in practice, in
Oh,
my
it's
opinion,
yeah,
it's all about devolving to it's atomizing the individual even more than modernity did.
I agree, and it's ultimately part of the project of modernity. However, one of the things it does is it gives you the tools to kill
Mhm.
modernity
Yeah.
for good, and to kill liberalism, I think too,
Yeah.
because it exposes the dark side of liberalism.
Yeah. I think these things need to die. It's hard for it's difficult for me to imagine a graceful transition.
Right. Well, no, but
I
that's
think it's going
right.
to be,
That's where there still becomes room for conservative thought, right? Because the pace of a revolution, of a thought revolution matters. And so yeah, I thank God for conservative voices that try to slow that, because there is harm that happens when those things happen too quickly. I don't think they're gonna. I don't. I mean, I thank God for the conservative voices, but I don't think they're gonna win. I
yeah.
think we're gonna go through a very rough transition.
I'm curious, like, I mean, and this is a complete shift of gears, but we haven't spoken in a minute. I'm curious what your take is on what's going on in Ukraine right now. Like what it seems to me like a further splintering of like because I see people like having like all these different like typical alliances along political lines are all being shifted by this in interesting ways. And I'm just curious what you think's what's going on underneath the hood.
I think that there's a lot of propaganda.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of propaganda
definitely.
from that's coming
All
out of
sides.
Russia, and I think there's a lot of propaganda that's coming out of the United States. Let me give you a little. Let me give you a little. Here's my latest thinking because it affected me today. I was actually
Mhm,
looking for a Bulgakov quote, and it's easier to pull a quote from an electronic source. So even though it's a
mhm.
book I own, I went to the Russian Bulgakov site that I use frequently as a resource in order to pull a Bulgakov quote, and it was down.
Oh wow.
So it's like, so why do we need? And almost certainly it wasn't down because of a technical error or or voluntary action. Almost certainly it was down because it's a Russian site.
So you think your ISP blocked it, or you think
I don't know. I don't know. I know it was available like last week.
send me
Yeah, I'll send
the
you the
site.
link.
I'll
I'll
try to
send
do some sleuthing to see where it's
some
being
sleuthing to
blocked.
see what. Okay, yeah. But that was my first thought. It's like, oh, it's just like, and because there's a lot. That's the other thing. That's the thing that's weird. It's like, okay, I'm a Gen Xer. It's like I lived through part of the Cold War. Not the whole thing, but at least
Mhm.
I mean, to be fair for Gen Xers, it's like it's the brighter part of the Cold War. I mean, we had things. We had things like the day after, but we also had things like Rocky Four. So
Yeah.
so but I don't remember there being any like actual animosity toward Russian people and Russian culture and the way we're seeing right now, and that is just so weird to me. That's really disturbing. It's like, why are we canceling Dostoevsky?
Oh,
Bec-
really? I hadn't
oh
seen
yeah, oh
that. Well,
yeah,
that's
oh
crazy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's just weird. And people like writing bad Yelp reviews about Russian restaurants and
Yeah, that
all this
stuff's
kind of
ridiculous.
weird stuff. It's funny. I asked and the Russians aren't doing this. I happen to know, by the way, because I have a friend. I have a friend who lives in Russia. He's studying for his PhD in semiotics in Irkutsk, and I asked him how things were for him because I was concerned because he's an American living in Russia, and he's like, actually, people are really kind and they still love American people here. They have no problem with American people. He said the thing that's making it hard for him is the sanctions because he can't move money
Yeah,
back and forth
but
from
he's
the
able.
States. So it's
So
like
he's
financially it's hard for him, but it's not. But in terms of how he's being treated as an American within Russia, he has no issues with that.
and clearly, if he's able to communicate with you, he doesn't have any issues with information access
Yeah,
there.
we were able to communicate through email, still no problem. So
Interesting.
yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah,
just
I have a lot of thoughts on this, but we don't have time for how much.
yeah,
And we're actually
yeah,
we're going to be, one of the things that we have upcoming is we're actually going to be doing a panel discussion on the thought of Alexander Dugin,
yeah.
the
Who's
Russian
going to be on that?
philosopher who is, everyone says is such a huge influence um, on Putin. So we'll have that. And then I actually reached out to Charles Upton, who's a traditionalist who wrote a traditionalist critique of Dugin as well. So I'm
Oh,
hoping
nice.
he hasn't responded yet. Hopefully I'll hear back from him because I'd like to have him on too. I actually ordered his book as well. So I'm going to read Dugin's book and then I'm going to read Upton's critique of Dugin from a traditionalist perspective. So
Very cool.
yeah. Well, this is great.
Yeah.
I hadn't had a chance to talk in a while, so it was great catching up with you. Did you record it too?
I didn't because
Okay. All right. I'll upload it soon. Good to see you again, Michael.
yeah, same here.
All right. Talk to you
Good
later.
seeing you.
Yep.
Later.